Noah's Ark is one of the most well-known tales from the Bible. God commanded Noah to build an ark to save himself, his family, and pairs of every kind of living creature from a cataclysmic flood meant to cleanse the earth. However, there are creatures that were notably absent from this divine rescue mission. But who were these creatures, and why were they excluded? In this video, we will delve deeply into the reasons behind why certain beings were not permitted on Noah's Ark, exploring the theological, environmental, and symbolic factors that influenced their exclusion. The purpose and design of Noah's Ark. It's important to first comprehend the purpose and design of the ark itself. According to Genesis 6:19-20, God instructed Noah to take pairs of every kind of living, land-dwelling, and air-breathing creature. The ark was a massive vessel, built to preserve life during the flood and to ensure the survival of species that could not survive in water. Its dimensions and structure were described in great detail, emphasizing its role as a floating sanctuary during the year-long flood. However, not every living creature was intended to be aboard the ark. The ark's primary purpose was to preserve the life necessary to repopulate the earth after the floodwaters receded. This meant that only those creatures directly involved in this new beginning were included, and others were left out for various reasons. Marine life. Adapted to survive the waters. One of the most obvious exclusions from the ark was marine life. Creatures like fish, whales, dolphins, and other sea-dwelling animals were not taken aboard the ark. The reason for this is straightforward. These creatures were already adapted to life in water. The flood, which covered the earth in water, would not have posed a threat to marine life. In fact, for these creatures, the flood could have been an expansion of their habitat. The flood narrative describes the destruction of life on land, but it is silent on the fate of the oceans. It's reasonable to assume that marine life continued unaffected by the flood, with species continuing their existence beneath the waves. This exclusion wasn't due to any form of divine judgment, but rather a practical consideration. The ark was designed for terrestrial and aerial creatures that would have otherwise perished in the deluge. Insects and small creatures, survivors of the flood. Another group of creatures that were not explicitly included in the ark's manifest were insects and small creatures like worms, spiders, and other invertebrates. The Bible does not provide detailed instructions on the preservation of these creatures, leading to various interpretations. For example, insects might have survived on floating vegetation or other debris. Many species of insects can endure long periods without food or water, and their small size makes them more resilient to environmental changes. Additionally, the sheer number of insects and their ability to reproduce rapidly means that their populations could quickly recover even if some were lost during the flood. Furthermore, some insects may have hitched a ride on the ark inadvertently, living in the crevices of wood or within the animal's fur. Given their small size and adaptability, insects were likely not a significant concern in the narrative of the ark. Mythical and hybrid creatures, the Nephilim and other beings. One of the more intriguing aspects of the Noah's Ark story is the mention of beings that were not included in the ark, such as the Nephilim. The Nephilim are briefly mentioned in Genesis 6-4, described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. They are often depicted as giants or mighty men of renown, and their presence on earth was one of the factors leading to God's decision to send the flood. The exclusion of the Nephilim from the ark is symbolic of their association with corruption and the moral decay that prompted the flood in the first place. These beings, seen as unnatural or the product of forbidden unions, were not part of God's original creation and were therefore not intended to be preserved. Their destruction in the flood can be interpreted as part of God's judgment against the moral and spiritual corruption that had overtaken the earth. In addition to the Nephilim, there is a broader category of mythical or hybrid creatures that have been the subject of much speculation. While the Bible does not provide a detailed list, other ancient texts and traditions speak of creatures that were part human, part animal, or otherwise unnatural. These beings, like the Nephilim, were seen as aberrations and were not included in the ark's cargo. Unclean animals. a different approach to preservation. The Bible makes a clear distinction between clean and unclean animals, particularly in the context of Jewish dietary laws. In Genesis 7:2, Noah is instructed to take 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal and only 1 pair of each kind of unclean animal. This distinction is significant, as it reflects the importance of certain animals in the sacrificial system that would later be established in the Mosaic Law. Clean animals were those that were considered suitable for sacrifices and for consumption, while unclean animals were not. However, it's important to note that even unclean animals were included on the ark, albeit in smaller numbers. Their inclusion suggests that all creatures, regardless of their status under dietary laws, were part of God's creation and were meant to be preserved. The exclusion of large numbers of unclean animals likely had practical reasons as well. The ark had limited space, and prioritizing animals that were essential for sacrifices and sustenance made sense. By taking only 1 pair of each unclean animal, Noah ensured that these creatures could repopulate after the flood, without taking up unnecessary space on the ark. The symbolic meaning of exclusion. The exclusion of certain creatures from Noah's ark carries deep symbolic meaning. The ark was a vessel of salvation, meant to preserve the integrity of God's creation. The creatures that were allowed on the ark were those that aligned with God's plan for a new beginning on earth. Those that were excluded, such as the Nephilim and other mythical beings, represented the corruption and moral decay that the flood was meant to cleanse. The story of Noah's Ark is not just about the survival of physical beings, but also about the preservation of spiritual and moral integrity. The creatures that were left behind, or not mentioned, symbolized the aspects of creation that had deviated from God's original design, and were therefore not meant to continue in the new world. Modern interpretations and questions. Today, the story of Noah's Ark continues to be a subject of fascination and debate. Scholars, theologians, and historians have offered various interpretations of why certain creatures were not included in the ark. Some view the story as a literal historical account, while others see it as a symbolic narrative that conveys deeper spiritual truths. Questions also arise about the logistics of the ark, how Noah managed to care for so many animals, how different species were represented, and what happened to the creatures that were not aboard the ark. In conclusion, the story of Noah's Ark is a rich narrative that touches on themes of survival, judgment, and renewal. While many creatures were brought onto the ark to survive the Great Flood, others were left behind for various reasons, including their ability to survive independently, their symbolic significance, and their alignment with God's plan. This story challenges us to reflect on the nature of creation, the consequences of corruption, and the hope of a new beginning.